I mean, what about you, Doctor? You were pretty horrified by it, weren't you?
Truly monumentally awful film. I mean, there's no saving the fact that one would like to be sort of pleasant about it, and I wish that they had done a better job of it. But it's absolutely appalling. I mean, 30 minutes in, they're buried in the rubble, and I was looking at my watch, and I knew we had another hour and a half to go. I thought, what on earth is going to happen? What happens? Are cringeworthy flashbacks, an incredibly ill-judged appearance of Jesus Christ with a water bottle for one of the men, which, I mean, it was just spine-crawling, and everything about the film struck me as misjudged. I was in America when it came out, and I remember noticing at the time that the reviews there were rather good, much better than they've been over here. And I think, really, the only reason why anyone should think this film's any good is the fact that Oliver Stone didn't do what some of us thought he might do, which was to repeat his atrocious JFK, one of the worst conspiracy movies in all time, and effectively have decided to... I mean, I assumed, coming from Oliver Stone, we'd have World Trade Center, you know, created by the Mossad and the FBI. And the fact that he didn't do that seems to me the only reason why anyone should be charitable about what is an appalling enterprise.
But it would make them heroes of our times.
And it's particularly hard to judge them as heroes when the leading segment, leading up to the point at which the towers collapse, they're sort of going into the towers to save people. And the appalling Nicolas Cage walking at the slowest pace I've ever seen. I say, get a move on, man. You're meant to be saving lives. And I mean, he had this ponderous sort of crawl towards the scene and then gets trapped. I agree. I mean, this story doesn't really encapsulate.
So you had the last sequence, right?
Having been tested in this movie, did that happen?
The thing is that it seems to me that, I mean, some people have been saying too soon. You know, a lot of New York audiences say it's too early. In some ways, actually, this film is too late. And we could have done with a film over the last few years that reminded people of the right side in the war on terror. I mean, it seems to me we've had things like Kingdom of Heaven that try to pretend that Christian fundamentalism is the real problem of our time. We've had a whole set of movies, including that dreadful Jodie Foster film where the plane hijacked itself. I mean... You know, we could have done with a film in the last 5 years, which actually reminded people why our armies are in Afghanistan and Iraq, why we have to fight this menace, and why we can't give up in the face of it. We could have done with some of these movies a few years ago.
I think, I mean, but you have seen them.
No, I refuse to see Flight 93 on principle. I mean, well, not on principle, really. Just, I mean, gut instinct that I knew I was going to find it too upsetting. I feel that Flight 93 is an important thing to let people know about, because it really is the untold story of 9/11. But for somebody like me who works and writes on these areas, I mean, I felt I already had a good knowledge from the 9/11 Commission report and other things of what happened on that plane. It has to be said that, I mean, although, as I say, I just couldn't bear to sit through it, just I knew how upsetting I was going to find it. I do think that it is an important film because it is the single story of that day, really, that is an optimistic story, because it's the one thing that happened that day when every instrument of state let people down, and when inhumanity was thriving. There was one situation in which people stood up for themselves and said, we will not take this. And I think they're great heroes, and they're people that not just Americans, but a lot of Europeans could do with emulating.
Yes, and also United 93 is out on DVD. But we should move on now. This is to a book. The attacks on London last year have since brought forth a number of books looking at the worldwide growth of Islamic terrorism. Melanie Phillips had a bestseller on her hands with Londonistan, and now Michael Gove, otherwise known as the Shadow Minister for Housing, has published Celsius 77, in which he argues that the West's approach to fundamentalism is destined to lead to further terrorist atrocities. I think we've all read the book. It's interesting that these books have come along at roughly the same time. It's as though somehow I perceive it as a penny is slowly dropping somehow. From your point of view, having written, being a neoconservative, having written extensively about these, how do you, what in fact does it add or clarify in the argument, this book?
I think Gove's done a great service, really, in refining a very complex and very lengthy narrative of the ideology which led to what happened on the tubes of London and buses of London a year ago. It's a much more readable book than a lot of books which have covered similar terrain. And I think it does a great job. It's not definitive, but it doesn't try to be. It simply explains very clearly and with incredible scholarship, which I have to say is kind of disguised. You don't have to know about it. It condenses all of this into, about 150 pages, less than that in a small book. It's fantastic.
Yes. Actually, on that point of scholarship, I actually wanted to point out, and it's probably, you might have heard, in the Sunday Times, William Dalrymple reviewed the book. Was it here? It's caused actually quite one of those little literary scandals, I suppose, because he actually criticised Michael Gove on rather strange grounds. It seemed to be rather scraping the barrel, that he didn't know any Islamic languages, and that I think that he didn't know...
Dalrymple's got a hell of a cheek. I mean, the phrase "gone native" could have been invented for Dalrymple. A man who in recent years has distinguished himself only in his sympathy for the enemy. He wrote a disgusting piece, even more disgusting than this, in the New York Review of Books after Bernard-Henri Lévy's book about the murder of Daniel Pearl came out. Essentially, what William Dalrymple did on that occasion was to justify the murder of Daniel Pearl. I mean, he effectively wrote the justification that Omar Sheikh would have done if the Pakistani authorities would have given him paper in prison. Absolutely reprehensible. And William Dalrymple has just displayed that, I mean, he may be a perfectly satisfactory historian, that's open to debate. He's a kind of fourth-rate Lawrence of Arabia wannabe. And has now decided very foolishly to tread into contemporary politics. And I think he's best out of it. We're certainly much better off if he doesn't get involved.
Yes, I think. Should we worry about, theatre, film? Doesn't it in a way show how irrelevant these things have become? Or?
Well, you remember after 9/11, one of the things that kept on being said was, where are the writers? Where are the people who can explain this to us? The truth was they weren't in the arts. It's perfectly obvious that filmmakers, novelists and poets and so forth kept on jumping on the wrong side. I mean, the fantastic example of where the arts are on this issue is demonstrated by George Clooney, if you can call that an art. And George Clooney said recently when he launched his McCarthyite movie, or movie about McCarthyism, he said, I'm taking a big career risk. No, you're not. You're not. Where are the disciples of Senator McCarthy? Where are those guys who are going to hunt you down? The thing you need to do if you're going to be an artist and you're going to challenge these things was demonstrated by Theo van Gogh, and he's dead. So if George Clooney and co, who are making millions upon millions of pounds from pandering to left-wing prejudices, could wake up to the fact they're part of the problem and are producing no answers, then we might be getting somewhere.
Yes.
It's a threat which can be
If
defined.
this is a war between two sides, it would just be nice if we knew which side the artistic community was on.
Yes.
It would be nice if it was on our side. It would be nice, most of all, if they weren't, as La Fallaci used to say, the late great Oriana Fallaci, if they weren't quite so conspicuously simply phony revolutionaries, always saying they're challenging the status quo, but guess what? Turns out they haven't got the balls to actually challenge it seriously.
Well, on that